This is 0verture, the Prelude Podcast. Welcome to the Prelude Podcast. My name is Kris Willis, and I'm a principal security researcher here at Prelude.
Hi, I'm Alex Manners. I'm a principal security engineer at Prelude.
So joining us today, we have Bart. Bart's a new security engineer here at Prelude. You'll likely hear more frequently his voice on the podcast. So Bart, you want to give us an intro?
Yeah, I go by Bart and pretty much any other name that can fit in there. My full name's Samuel Bartholomew. Before this, I was working with a cyber protection team for the military and got into contact with Alex, and now I work here.
First, we're going to start off with a question to you, Bart. What security technology or concept outside of currently what you're doing do you want to see get better next year?
One of the security concepts that I don't think we have enough of data on or anything yet is Starlink. Like one of the things, right? Like if you actually do, how they're going to deal with, having a global network like that, and whether or not it's going to change some of the way the attacks happen, and trying to pin down where something came from and stuff like that. Just, I think in the next few years with them and Amazon doing their things, that probably going to see some very weird concepts of security that are going to have to be put in place for those.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize there's a lot of bandwidth for the constellation internet capability stuff that SpaceX and Amazon are doing. But a lot of that is actually capped from the government. So the government takes a lot of that bandwidth. And so we only, from a standard to the standard person, we only get a little bit of that bandwidth. The government gets quite a bit of it.
I, for one, am looking forward to the CSI episodes where they're saying the cyber attacks are coming from everywhere. They're using the satellites.
Yeah, it's interesting too to see how upgrades are done on those constellations, because currently SpaceX, because they were trying to get it out and get it to work somewhat, they left a lot of the things that they promised out. So like the laser capabilities are not there, but they're now putting the laser capabilities in. And so it will be interesting to see how they will integrate new capabilities into the existing models that are in space currently. So
it's fascinating to me because I also am a huge fan of space in general, and I like to research a lot of this stuff. Is one of the side effects of all these satellites going up is it's making terrestrial astronomy incredibly difficult. You have very bright satellites, large fleets of very bright satellites in low Earth orbit that are making it difficult for light to get through the atmosphere down to our receivers on Earth. And I don't even know like the latest or state of the latest in that, but it's kind of those side effects that you don't necessarily think about when you're trying to put fleets of satellites into space. But what else do we not know that it could be impacting beyond just astronomy, right? And like the aforementioned bandwidth that is available. What are the impacts of that outside of just what we cage in just InfoSec and IT?
I think China had released some stuff that they had almost came into contact with the satellites or something, some of their stuff. And yeah, it was just funny because like you said, I remember, I think right when they first launched the first stack, I think they got a petition signed by a bunch of astronomers and stuff that said that it was going to cause issues with their observing of the stars. So
yeah, and then also what's it called? The other one that I was trying to think of, and as I rambled earlier, there's a term for when there's a cataclysmic chain of objects in space where if you get a certain amount of debris spreading out, it'll cause a chain reaction of debris that will basically destroy everything in low Earth orbit and make it impossible to launch vehicles off Earth into space, because you'll just get hit by debris and explode. So what is the threshold for that, and how is the U.S. military, how is like Space Force, right? How are they mitigating that? How are we going to address that as more companies are starting to put more and more fleets of satellites into space? I'm more interested in the physical side.
Yeah, I know that they're looking at like having cleanup satellites that would go into low Earth orbit and kind of clean up some of the small debris, but I think that's like an ongoing effort. It'll end up being something like cleaning up the ocean. It just takes forever.
It's called the Kessler syndrome, the Kessler effect. So if you have enough objects in low Earth orbit, the collision rate goes up, and that could cause a cascade in which each collision generates more space debris, increasing the likelihood of further collisions. So as we're shoving more and more into low Earth orbit, the potential for that to happen also goes up. And I wonder, somebody's probably done the math, and I bet if we Googled it, we could see what the math looks like, but super curious on that.
Yeah, especially with those constellations being so close.
Mm-hmm.
You hit one, and then you probably get several others.
Hey, it's like what's the speed? Is 15,000 miles an hour? What's the speed to be in orbit? However many tens of thousands of miles an hour, like shotgun debris.
Well, so today we're going to be talking about breaking into the security field. And so I think this is going to be an awesome topic, just to sort of get all of our perspectives on how we've entered the security field. And I think, we've all kind of gone different paths. Pretty much everybody will go down a different path, but it's good to hear what paths people have gone down and things that you share, things that are different. And then we'll also talk a bit about what we have done differently now that we've kind of gone through the space and sort of know the lay of the land, what we have done differently based on what we know now. So Bart, you want to go first and kind of talk about your breaking into the security field?
Yeah, for sure. I was one of the pretty much military transition people. I always did computer stuff before I got in, but it wasn't really at the like when I joined the military, that's when I became like a system administrator. Before that, I was strictly like I'd fix computers and stuff. Just so like getting in, let's see, 2011. Yeah, so 2011. Wow, that's a long time. I joined, and I got put as a systems administrator, which is funny. It actually goes into how I know Alex. He used to run my shop, so it go full circle. It's pretty crazy to see that it's 10 years almost. Well, I know. I guess you were there at like 2013 or so.
2013, yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, like from there, that got me into the, just the way that servers interact and clients and all of that. And then I retrained into cyber warfare, which I have to say, like out of all the military branches that I've worked with, which I've worked with quite a few, the Air Force really has a unique way of doing their cyber warfare stuff. Just the training that you go to and everything, it seems to do a really good job at giving you this like very wide but baseline view of it. Like you go through law, you go through, offensive, defensive, like all the separate ones. Not necessarily deep, like super deep or anything, but enough to where it kind of gets you in the right place to continue building on it.
We actually had a conversation about that in a prior podcast, and I brought up exactly what you're describing. The Air Force seems to have a good way of taking Joe Schmo, Jane Smith off the street and at least getting them to a point where they could know nothing about computers, but be pretty much functional as an operator at the end of their training pipeline. And I'm curious what your perspective on that is, because that's perspective I certainly have had.
I think that has a lot to do with the type of person as well. Right. Because like, I guess that's kind of the difference is like it seems like, at least for me, like when I look at like security people, is most of them always had a background prior to that. It's not normal that you like meet somebody and they're like, yeah, I just got out of college and I'm doing security. They always have this like, this led me to security type thing. And the Air Force picked up on that, I think. And that's why, like, when they started up the cyber warfare field, they would only take people that had already had system administration background or network transport, stuff like that. And they noticed that, right? Because there's a lot of stuff in security that you could probably get lost on, I think, if you didn't have at least some background. But it's one of those things. It's like, it's going to take a lot of our education system and everything to like, there needs to be more computer stuff in like high school. There needs to be more computer stuff in middle school, even. Like, it's crazy, but with the way the world's going in technology. Yeah.
So for the train, because is it still 1B4? That's the Air Force AFSC. So when you did your 1B4 transition, because so Bart and I worked together in the Air Force back in 2014 is actually when it was in Tucson, Arizona. So when you did your transition to 1B4, were they only accepting 1B4 applicants that came from 3D, which is for listeners, 3 Delta is basically all of this, the cyber technologies. Think of it as your like IT infrastructure, system administrator, network administrator type positions.
Yeah. And not only that, right? Like when I first, actually, I want to say that they still are only taking it. No, there was like talk, I think back in 2017, right around 2017 about taking pipeline, like brand new from like basic. But yeah, when I went through, I had, not only did you 3 Delta was a requirement, you had to have a cyber career. You also had to take the IQPT or something like that. I think it's a intelligence test of some sort. And then you also had to do a person-to-person interview with the chief master sergeant of the career field.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. After all that, that's when they accepted you when I went through. But yeah, like, I know they were talking about changing it in 2017, but there was a lot of pushback regarding like if people would be lost or whatever, if they just straight out boot camp took them into cyber warfare.
I wonder if they are accepting like if you go to MEPS or whatever, and you're basically saying, I'm going straight to 1B4. I wonder if they offer that, or if they offer contingency, we'll make you 1B4 if you train for 3 Delta and you're successful, we'll just immediately shove you into the 1B4 pipeline.
That's what they were talking about, actually, was to do like some sort of, you do go through 3 Delta just so that they don't like lose somebody from the 1B4 career field right away. Mm-hmm. And then if you're like top 5, top 10 in your class or something, then you would get the ability to move into the 1B4. But I don't know if that ever took off either. But back to like the military definitely gives you that like on the job training, I guess, right? Compared to like, that's always kind of the difference, I guess, between academic and military. When I viewed it was like, they're all about just putting you on, and you either fail hard or you kind of succeed. So it's really it's good for, I think, certain people, the military way of doing things.
So is it different going so if you're wanting to choose your career path, is it different if you're doing enlisted to officer, where like officer, you pretty much just say, I want to do cyber, they're probably going to have a seat for you. But if you went into enlisted, you kind of have to go through the extra paces.
So when I retrained, I was actually up with a bunch of officers. That's what's funny is like the first place I went, I think there was more officers than there was enlisted where I ended up at, over in Maryland. And I think they're 1 Alpha, I want to say, is what the career field for them is. There's
for
like
cyber officers.
Yeah,
it's like 17 Sierra, 17 Delta, and 17 Sierra.
One's offense, one's defense, I think, or something like that.
So to give you a quick background, it used to be every cyber warfare was 33S. So you have numbers. These numbers we're saying, people are like, what the hell does this mean? 33, you have 10 10X, 20X, 30X. So a 33 is basically support. Anything that starts with the number 1 is, quote, operations, right? So your pilots are going to be like, I think they're 13s, or I don't know what the number is. And then you'll have like information operations operators, and those will be 14 Foxtrots or something. Then you have cyber warfare. So when they did the cyber warfare transition, they made basically all 33 S's overnight. They were like, you're now all operations people. You're now 17 deltas, which obviously didn't work. So now they did a couple different variations, and they've kind of settled on, you have IT support, infrastructure type people. And I think they're just kind of like core 17 delta. And then you can have offensive or defensive oriented people, and those fall into 17 Sierra. But I think we would need to get somebody who really is still in to actually tell us the definitive way it is. But that's the general breakdown. I think the latest of where we are. To answer your question, Kris, though, for Air Force officers, it's actually very different from the enlisted personnel. So your enlisted personnel, as Bart was describing, you'd come in as like a cyber transport or IT admin, sysadmin, right? And then you transition to cyber warfare. When you're a brand new second lieutenant coming in as a 17 Delta, you're actually put into the same training pipeline that the 1 Bravo 4 cyber warfare enlisted personnel are put into. So you get the cyber warfare training no matter what job you're going to in the Air Force as a cyber officer.
Okay.
And then if you're going to a offensive defensive unit, you'll get additional training on top of that. But I think what Bart alludes to, and where the Air Force and military really gets the bang for the buck, is the OJT, on-job training. And there's a whole formal way that OJT is handled. And actually, Bart, could you talk a little bit about that from your experiences? Like what OJT entails in the military?
Yeah, so as funny as that is, I actually sat as a unit training manager for almost a year. So they have, it kind of comes down from the career field leads. They kind of come through and they get consensus through the entire career field, and they say, what are these things that somebody should know? And then they rate them on different scales of like how knowledgeable you need to be. And then essentially your first line supervisor, so whoever is rating on you, they will essentially make sure that you meet the proper efficiency or technical level for each one of those. And then you have certain people inside each shop that maybe just does the training. It's like train the trainer or something like you have to go through so that you can actually certify and sign people off. Once again, this is like from what I know of like when I was in, which I got out in 2017. So, I mean, things could have changed, but that's kind of how it was, where like there are certain ones that like you actually had to show that you could do. And then there was other ones that were like just knowledge based, like, hey, what would you do in this situation, or what's the proper way of doing this? But they have this whole list, and it's a lot. I mean, it's a lot, depending on what rank you are, things like that. Like as your rank goes up, you'll get extra ones, and yeah.
And that's just for the basics, right? Because you're not even talking about like weapon system qualification training that goes on top of that as well.
Yeah. And I mean, and that's the other thing, right? Is like the other thing that the military, I think, offers a lot of people is that there's always like an option. Granted, if you're willing and you put the work in for it, I should say, they normally always have a way to where you can finagle yourself into where you want to be. Like after I went through, a lot of people, the next thing was to go through a certain class that would allow you to become an operator, or like a on keyboard operator. And, that's a completely separate, right? Like extra that you have to go through. And I mean, the fail rate on that, I think is like somewhere is like, I think it was like 50% actually. It was pretty crazy, for that one. I was more of the developer type person. I wanted to go through and do tool development, things like that, which is why I'm working over here. But yeah,
that's interesting. It sounds like, I mean, obviously I'm speaking from similar experiences. And the Air Force, I think the big difference that I guess is a good transition point over to Kris is the Air Force and like military in general. If you want to go become a SME in something, there's almost certainly a training pipeline that exists to get to that point. And so like there are some training pipelines like pilot training, right? That's a super long training pipeline. It's multiple years. There are some cyber training programs that are also 6 months, 2 years. So you could find those types of training programs available to you inside the military. And we'll kind of loop back around to this at the end, I think. But that's one of the big differentiators in my mind between the military right now and how it's approaching cyber training and getting people spun up, and how academia is approaching it. And Kris, do you want to talk a little bit about your kind of trajectory to where you are now?
Yeah. I mean, I had the academic approach. Definitely, I wasn't in the military, so I didn't take that path. So I kind of got lucky because I just so happened to choose a school that had a really great cyber club. We didn't have a good cyber program. In fact, the majority of computer science professors at my university did not support anybody from our cyber program or our cyber club. And it was just that there was a professor there, Jeremy Rasmussen, who said, he went to DEF CON. He's like, I want to create a DEF CON CTF team. And the next year they were in DEF CON CTF.
Wow.
And that was like the people from Legit BS who ran DEF CON CTF. That was those people. And so they're incredibly talented. They're doing amazing things now. But when I was a student, like I was lucky enough to just be a part of that club. We were looking for things to do as a freshman. And I didn't really understand, like, when you go into academia, you're like, and you're like choosing your path in college. Like, first I wanted to do political science. I wanted to go be a lawyer. And then I dropped that pretty quickly. And then went to do computer science. And like, you don't really understand that you can't just go to class every day and expect to get anything out of it. And I was lucky enough to, like, I was bored and I wanted to find other things to do. And so I looked at clubs and saw the security club and said, hey, that sounds interesting. I'll go do that. And then some other friends ended up joining and doing that as well. And that became like a really awesome thing because a lot of the alumni were still really active. Our club is super active from an alumni standpoint. And so they always contribute back. And we would just learn reverse engineering and crypto and web security and kind of learned on our own. And then we would just go back and teach that on Fridays. We always had meetings on Fridays at 5. So you had to be dedicated to go. And then we go to the German restaurant and get schnitzel and drinks later. And that was our thing. And so and then we played CTFs on the weekends. And so, like I said, until I was president of that club, and then we also had Florida Center for Cybersecurity that came into our university. So University of South Florida, for people that don't know. So when the state started to buy in and knew that cybersecurity was going to be a big thing and trying to get more research into the state of Florida for cybersecurity, that's when there was sort of a transition of university professors caring to actually promote and to do things with cybersecurity. Before that, it really just there was definitely professors that were just outright not a fan of WCSC at all. And that kind of hurt our club. So when we were competing at DEF CON and we had the capabilities to compete at DEF CON, that's when Shellfish was also starting, and Giovanni Vigna and those guys. That's when PPP was starting, and Carnegie Mellon. And so we were in the groundbreaking time to do that. The difference is that those schools embraced those clubs and really made them a thing. And then research was then tied around that. And that's the really big thing with cybersecurity in academia today is like, you really got to have a robust research program that then brings more talented people into your university. And so that's one of the things you really got to look at when you're looking to get into a program, you want to do cyber. Like, look at their research, look at the professors that are there, and then you can kind of make a good estimation or guess, like, is this a school I want to go to? And then look at the clubs, because you're still going to need that. There's a lot of, so we learned a lot of offensive capabilities and offensive stuff. We really didn't focus on defense. Like, we did CCDC and Hack UCF, which was just down I-4. Like, they won every year I was at USF. They had a program that was good for them to do that. Like, they had IT. Their IT program was in person, and our IT program wasn't in person. So we had a lot of computer science people, and so we just cared a lot more about like the reverse engineering side and binaries, and didn't necessarily think about like Active Directory and how you would set that up and the defensive nature of that. And so we ended up usually doing better in CTFs. They ended up doing better in CCDC. But the difference is that, and this goes into the whole university politics thing, but CCDC is better for clubs and better for the university because it promotes the university, whereas CTFs don't promote universities. They tend to promote the club. So when I go to sign up for, if I'm, WCSC and I sign up for CTF, I'm WCSC. I'm not WCSC USF. And USF doesn't get any recognition for that. So they never cared. They still don't care about CTFs. If you ask them, like, if white hatters or this could go for any university, most universities don't see a benefit of somebody qualifying for DEF CON CTF, but they'll see huge benefits when you qualify for something like, nationals for CCDC, because nationals for CCDC, their whole thing is promoting the university first. And so there's that whole university politics thing that goes around with that. And so a lot of times, like, some of the universities that are really, really good at CTFs are less known. Like, Purdue does really well in CTFs. Georgia Tech does CTFs really well. USF has really been big into the CTFs for a long time. UCSB, so University of Santa Barbara, like, they do extremely well. Carnegie Mellon, you don't necessarily see them as cybersecurity universities, but then when you look at the CTF field, like, that's a completely different like ball game. And so the people coming out of those clubs are just extremely well versed and capable when they go onto the field. And
so that's interesting. Why wouldn't, I would think, as a college administration staff, having a club that is that's associated with my university, even if it's not explicitly tied together, winning competitions, very large competitions, would be a positive thing, and I would want to support that. And I'm very confused why that.
So it has a lot to do with they don't know how to market that, and also too they don't see any benefit, because when somebody goes to university and they say, I want to sponsor, what we found from white hatters was that they want to sponsor white hatters. They want to sponsor WCSC. They don't want to sponsor USF.
Sure.
And because they don't want their money to be funneled somewhere else. And the university doesn't want that. So from a standpoint of like, and they want to get their name out there. That's the other part. So the way like Santa Barbara does it is really smart. So what they do is Giovanni basically, has this lab, that they do all their research out of. And so they sponsor, like University of California, Santa Barbara, like they sponsor on the research side. They say we're doing this amazing research. So that's where they get their recognition, where Shellfish gets its recognition just by being Shellfish, and they just happen to be a part of the same group, right? If you're a part of Shellfish, you're probably part of that lab.
Yeah.
So that's how they kind of get their recognition, and that's how they get money. Where like we never got any money from the University of South Florida for the longest time because they just didn't want to support it because they didn't see any reason to.
So yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of dual hatting, right? You're a researcher by day, CTF by night, and that makes sense. And I'm just kind of taken aback that it seems like there's a lot of opportunity there for a lot of universities, and it's unseized opportunity, unrealized opportunity.
I mean, even if you look at
I don't know any academia.
Yeah, it also goes down to like professors as well. Like you have to have a professor there that's willing, that's able, So Jeremy was a great person to be the first person to start to be a part of White Hatters and to start White Hatters. But he was an instructor, right? And so he couldn't bring in the research because he couldn't hold research. And so that's one of the things too, is like you have to have a professor who can hold research that is basically the club, because that's how you see a lot of these some of the better clubs prevail. So like Carnegie Mellon, they had Dawn Song, and then before Dawn Song they had, or after Dawn Song they had David Brumley. And so those two professors really brought in that research and then basically facilitated the club of PPP. And you just had really good people at Carnegie Mellon. And then the same goes for like UCSB. So UCSB, like they had a professor that was, so Giovanni Vigna, who kind of cultivated this club and then got to hold the research and kind of brought that together. And now you see that with like Arizona State and Jan and Fish. Like they took their stuff that they knew from UCSB and brought it to Arizona State. If you're looking today, like to go into doing offensive cyber and defensive cyber, like Arizona State is one of the best places you could go, just because the professors that are there. Same goes for Purdue. There was a professor there that kind of cultivated that group, and then now there's a really good cyber CTF team, and they just been kind of they've been more recent, sort of like Arizona. So
you have a lot of intimate knowledge, and this is obviously brand new information to me. Like, I guess I have two questions here. One, it's how do we expect people to find out this kind of stuff? And then two, where can we find these types of answers? And three, how do we ask the right questions to find these types of places in an academic environment?
That's such a good question. It's really hard, right? Like if you know the people in the field, then that's one thing. Like that's how I knew. Like I was at White Hatters. I was a president of White Hatters, and I was like, well, how does all these other teams do it? And sort of like broke up all the pieces and just kind of figured it out. And that's the other thing that's kind of hard about academia, right? Like I said, like I came in thinking I was going to be, I was going to be a lawyer. And then I changed to do more of what I wanted to do as a passion, which was computer science. And so I just, like I said, got lucky. If you go in knowing that you want to do cyber or cybersecurity or computer science, and then you have a little bit more options. And if you're already in sort of the cyber realm and you're already doing CTF, so like, NYU Poly does Seesaw, and they cater to a CTF that's just for high school students. And if you're a part of that, then you're already in that little bit of like that space. and you can sort of see like who qualifies for Seesaw in the US and look to see which teams are which and try to go for those places. But even then you may not know like of USF, or you might not know of Hack UCF. You might not know of Purdue or Arizona State. Arizona State now sort of plays, they when they originally started, they played under a different team, and now they're part of, I think, Shellfish. So it makes it a little bit more confusing too.
So I guess by way of asking more questions here, is there a list that somebody can refer to get these types of answers? Does that exist?
Yeah. So I mean, there's CTF time. So if you wanted to like, if you knew like, so that's one of the other bigger parts. Like I keep talking about CTFs, but in reality, the thing about academia today is that it doesn't matter what school you go to. It matters, like it sort of still goes back to that on the job training, but instead of doing it on the job, you have CTFs, and we use CTFs as a way to get ready for the security field. Whereas if you just took your classes, like even for cybersecurity programs, they're not good enough. And in many cases, like the professors have not gone into the field to do these things. They went from doing their research and going directly to being a professor, and they don't have that knowledge. And so you need the CTFs in order to basically be ready to go into the industry. So CTFs are really important.
I'm just thinking, based off everything you just described, maybe we can throw up a Prelude org 0verture repo and just like list out these schools and clubs for people so they can have a resource they can at least refer to if they're interested in. For any high schoolers that are listening, they're looking for schools where they can meet like-minded people. Just having that reference point without having to already know those people might be helpful.
So the other thing I'd say is regarding that as well is because when I was in Maryland, I was still in the Air Force, but I did Cyber Patriot, which was for the high schools, right? And that was one of those things that he was talking about. I mean, granted, that one's more like not really offensive. It's kind of like a defensive as well.
Cyber Patriot basically gets you ready for CCDC.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely see that. You can see the school systems like trying to kind of, breed that like mentality of like, hey, I think you mentioned it well, is like you want to be part of the community, right? Like that, like how do you become part of the cybersecurity community? And these clubs and stuff is a very, I think, good and, I mean, useful way, right? Like you're helping your program as well. Like if you're in the college, right, and you're doing this, you're also going to help your grades while you're going through cybersecurity or while you're going through a CS degree or something, because you're just learning that. But like I'd say for any high schoolers and stuff, you should definitely check for Cyber Patriot in your school. And that's a good intro because you'll get people that are like either military teaching, being the mentor on it, right? And but I've met some really bright. It's funny because there's always these like one or two kids that you're like, dude, you just ran an Nmap across like the entire thing, and like they weren't even supposed to be running Nmap. You're like, but you, I'll keep my eye on you because later on, I bet you're going to be one of these guys that are, like that you hear about in the news where you're like, wow, like, where George Hotz come from and stuff like that. It's like they're just curious, right? And you're building up on that.
Yeah. I mean, a shameless plug too. Like if you're a professional in the field and you want to do something good for the community, there is so many high schools that really need people to stand up and be like the Cyber Patriot mentor. I always see like lots of high schools that want to get into that, but just don't have the coursework, and then they sort of create clubs into themselves, right? Thinking like the best high school you could go to do cyber, I think right now is TJ, so Thomas Jefferson. They do C64 Seabread. Well, that team was a part of that, and then they kind of moved on. But like the Cyber Patriot, like there's tons of high schools that want to do that. They just don't have the mentors. And if you're looking to do some help within the community, that is definitely something to look into.
Yeah. Which, I mean, I think that kind of touches on the next thing that like we're the hobbyists kind of like are like, how do you like, that area? Like, you're
Alex,
just
you want to talk about like sort of your background into how you got into cyber?
Yeah. So I actually did start in high school. And I can draw a line directly to specifically 2 teachers and 2 classes that I had. And I will call them out. Colleen Kelly and Kyle Schmidt were 2 of my high school teachers. And one of them Colleen taught me computer science. So I did computer science in high school, which was pretty rare back when I was in high school. I mean, not super rare, but it was not offered in a lot of high schools. And then Kyle Schmidt offered this course that like notionally was supposed to teach you how to get I think it was your like IT fundamentals, your CompTIA IT basic certification. But what actually happened in that class was we were starting to have all of those security mechanisms for classes where they could like remotely monitor your computer. We started getting all that stuff. And during that class, we started trying to figure out how to turn off all that stuff. And in addition to that, like, you know, just finding all of the network shares that they were storing all their stuff on and just doing all that kind of stuff. And it was an environment where we were, I wouldn't say told by the administration we were allowed to do these things, but we were like allowed to experiment. And in that one class, we had basically all of the old hardware that was either going to get put away or tossed was all brought into a room. So we had old switches, old routers, we had old printers where the interface was broken and we had no way to get into it. So we had to figure out how to like remotely access the system. And that was like foundational for me in terms of everything I did after that. So that was what I would say is like my break-in was just having somebody facilitate that creativity that we're talking about in a sort of formal fashion. And then after that, I kind of had a more combination, honestly, of the 2 of your backgrounds. So I went to college and actually did it's called engineering management with systems analysis, but it was like a half entrepreneurship degree and a half computer science process engineering degree. And then I went into cyber warfare training at the Air Force after that. So I kind of did 3 different routes of breaking into training, and each of them taught me different things. And what I would say is what I learned from all of that is each of them teaches you, each of those ways taught me something different that I hadn't learned in the other way that I developed that skill set. So that's kind of how I got my start. And a lot of it was just a lot of it was just the creativity and boiled down to being given an opportunity to just kind of mess around with stuff.
Yeah, and I think that plays a big part on like why I like to see the clubs, and not just clubs, but like classes, like you said, that give you that leeway and stuff. Cause I mean, we also, I took, I think 1 programming class when I was in high school. And the teacher was really cool. Like, I guess so the only way you can explain it, right, is like really cool. Like it was in essence, it was like, hey, these are your semester projects, do these. Once you do that, you can mess around on the computer any way you want. And I think that's really what breeds like the good security people, is the people that do it not because they have to, because, you know, they're going to that class and like that's the only reason they're doing it, but because they want to, right? Like you want to learn, you're almost intrigued by it. And I think like anybody who has that mindset, and that's the thing is like I would rather take somebody who has a mindset for wanting to learn and wanting to like figure out why something does something, like even in any engineering mindset almost, and take that over, you know, somebody who is just doing computers because like it's the money or something, right?
Sure.
Something like that. And those are the people I think you see really thrive in security, because it's almost like a game, right? Like you're trying to, how do I get around this? How do I beat this? How can I detect somebody trying to do that? Stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Puzzle solvers.
Yeah.
And
Right,
then puzzle creators. And then also you have this like lazy mentality, which is not the word, like it's not the best word to use in that stance, but it's like you want to really like a really great hacker is somebody who's lazy because they can just like figure it out and they'll find some really odd path that just doesn't go the normal path and sort of breaks all rules. And so you have something that does something in maybe 1 or 2 steps instead of like 6 or 7 steps. So it's that lazy mentality, which is not really it's not really lazy. It's just like they try to find something to do something much easier.
Well, and that's what's funny, right? Is that example is always funny because it's like, yeah, the best programmers are lazy people because they're just like, you know, like how can I actually take, like I'll spend 3 hours doing this, even though it only takes me 5 minutes. But the way I look at it is like, those are 5 minutes that I'm doing constantly. Maybe like I have to do it every like day when I wake up or something. It's like, well, I'll invest the 3 hours into it just to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And yeah, like it's funny that you bring that up because like, yeah, it's.
So I also, there's one person not on this call who would give another good perspective, but I'll just briefly summarize it. Our CTO, he didn't have a computer until he was 18. So he didn't have a computer at all until he was 18. He was a journalism major in college. And now he's an incredibly successful developer and security engineer. And he was a CTO of a cybersecurity company. So there's like, I guess the important thing is it really boils down to finding something you're interested in and pursuing that. I know it's very cliched to say, but it's the truth, right? Like nothing, if you were to remove everything that all of us described, if you were to remove the word cyber and security from that from the context, and you were to drop in any other career field or industry, it's going to be the same kind of conversation because it's foundational, right? I'm doing this because I'm super interested in learning about it and I want to develop this skill set. And like that tends to be a path to success for people irrespective of industry, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I always try to tell people that as well, is like, hey, if you're getting into security for the money, you're probably not going to like it. Because if you're doing it for the money only, and you're gonna be miserable every day sitting there, you know, doing something you don't want to do. And I mean, if you look at like successful people, like even like chefs or something, it's funny, but like if you look at like a chef that's like super successful and everything, like you can tell their passion to do what they do, like they love it. And same with like weldings, like welders, like I see some guys that like just, you know, upload videos of them welding stuff, and then you look and they make like, you know, $200,000-$300,000 a year doing welding for specific industries, and you're just like, what? Like it's all about, you know, passion. I think is what it comes down to. Is
my younger brother is a aircraft mechanic, certified A&P, and he loves what he does, and he's phenomenal at it. I have no idea what he's doing, and I frankly have no interest. Like I get into an airplane and I want it to go up and come down, and I want to get there in one piece, right? But he can tell you everything about an aircraft. He can tell you scary things about aircraft that I didn't know, that now I'm a little more frightened to fly, truthfully. But he loves it, right? It's his passion and it's what he's interested in. And I think actually, now that I'm kind of on that topic, that's one of the big differences, I think. And we've talked about this in past podcasts, is if you say, I want to become an aircraft mechanic, there's actually a training program you can go to that will take you from knowing nothing to being certified to go work on an airplane. Like you get 2 certifications. Those 2 certifications allow you to do airframe and propulsion, and then you can go work on an aircraft, and you're certified to repair aircraft and certify aircraft to fly. Like that pipeline is very clear and explicit. And as we talked about in the podcast with Spencer and Lewis, that there's no parallel in cybersecurity right now. And you've just heard 3 completely different trajectories for people getting into a career field, and they're all completely different. And the 4th, David's, very different from the 3 of ours. That kind of illuminates the core problem here, I think. Yeah. Like ultimately, how do you break into I think anybody who's saying, here's how you break into the career field and tells you this is the way to do it, they're probably wrong, because there really isn't a good way to break into the career field, unfortunately. I don't know. That's just my perspective. That's an Alex perspective.
It's also being pre-exposed to things too. Like, so like I was pre-exposed to doing binary stuff, and I just so happened to like binary stuff. But you could also be exposed to cybersecurity from the business side, and that's what you enjoy doing.
Yeah.
And so there's such a huge variation of cybersecurity, and I think that's some of the reason why academia, they don't know what to do with that, right? Because the engineering departments don't like to play nice with the business departments, and so you don't get that. You either choose engineering or you choose business. And they've kind of started to work together with that and try to build something that you can have it's the understanding of cybersecurity being multidisciplinary, right? But that's still a problem, right? Where you almost have to, I think that's where some people get into this notion where they say, you need to go do IT before you go and do cyber, right? Or you need to go and do development before you go do cyber. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact of how they were predisposed to it. They were exposed to it by doing, software development, and then just happened to be like, I want to go write tools for cyber stuff because that's kind of what I was doing. And that's not really needed. You just kind of need to know where you want to go. And that's the hard part with cyber, is so multidisciplinary that there's so many paths and ways forward.
I'd like to shout out my alma mater, actually, to your point about engineering and business schools not wanting to work well. So my school, Miami University in Ohio, not the one in Florida, Miami University, Ohio. My degree was actually literally 50% in the engineering department and 50% out of their business school. So you have the Farmer School of Business, which is very well known, very well respected. And then you have the School of Engineering, which is also well known, well respected. And they were able to build that engineering management program so that you're taking all of your engineering classes up to 400 level, but you're also taking business classes all the way up to the 400 level. And it gave me in particular a very well-rounded experience. And I still got a BSc. So I still have a bachelor's of science in engineering out of that degree, but I still got to do business stuff, which I do find interesting.
Yeah. And I was going to say, it's funny, right? A lot of people think that getting into the security field's hard. But I think when you look at it and you take a step back right now and you see all of the different ways, it's probably actually one of the easiest fields to get into, right? Because you can get in via all of these other ways. And really the only thing I think it comes down to is like we said, that passion to want to do it, right? And that's the thing is I think anybody who has the want to get into cyber and they put the time into it, they put, the sweat and all of the nights of staying up thinking about a question and all of that into it, you can get into it and you can be successful in it.
Yeah. So I think really what we should do as a result of this is aggregate together all of our stuff onto a README, and we'll put up a GitHub repository with just the resources that we've found successful in our past, and we'll keep it. Definitely, we want to keep it what we have found successful, because I'm going to loop back to my original point. I don't want people to think we're saying this is the way to get into the industry, because I think that nobody has that answer. That being said, it's a good transition. So what would any of you have done differently, given what you know now, given all of this experience that you've accrued over the years?
I have maybe a little bit of a controversial one that I would do differently.
Oh yeah? Let's hear it.
So I think that so I went from doing stuff in academia and doing stuff I had a really my first job was kind of strange in that I basically did management of cybersecurity research for the entire state of Florida, and I was a master's student. And so I was telling, professors and PhDs that, giving critiques on their research, probably not I was good at what I was doing, but it was difficult on both sides, right? I'm just a master's student and things like that. I think what I've done differently, so to go to that, back to that point, so I went from academia to doing DoD contracting, And so like I did that because a lot of the alumni at the time were saying like, go do the cool spooky stuff. and that's a lot of fun, right? I should have explored, though, I think going from academia and research, I wish I would have explored more the national labs and things like that. And then also exploring commercial. Because I think that gives a different perspective. And there's a lot of people within commercial that just never leave. Once they're in the commercial space, they don't go to like the small, like that perspective gets lost, I think, in the cybersecurity realm. Where those people just kind of like, if you go to like an Apple or a Google, they just like, they stick there and they don't leave. Right. And that perspective gets lost a lot of times. And so it'd be interesting to know how that perspective is. And I kind of wish I would have explored that. Instead, I just went directly into DoD contracting, and I had a good time. Like I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing right now if I didn't have that perspective. But I wish I would have explored more perspectives when I was kind of looking when I first started, because I think that's another thing within cyber in a little bit of a ways is like, and I think this goes with other things as well. Like you sort of have like your silos, and once you get into like that silo of career, it's hard to go to another one. Like for a little while there after DoD contracting, I wanted to go do space stuff. And that's like, I mean, some of that applies, right? But it's just hard to like get into that. Like once you choose sort of your path, that's your path. And you don't necessarily think about that when you like are just like looking to like, what do I want to do? So I kind of wish I would have explored those paths at least. Maybe I still would have gone down the DoD contracting route, but kind of wish I would have explored those.
What about you, Bart?
So for mine, I'd say I like my path quite a bit, but I would question why I didn't start earlier, right? I mean, that's the thing, right? Is like I was always, it's weird because like I was always pretty good at fixing computers and stuff like that, and I really wish I would have, had somebody that I had. Like, it's funny. I guess I'll do a shout out to like the one guy I remember in high school who I met in that programming class I had talked about earlier, Blake Caruvius, and he's I think he works for some big companies in San Francisco. So, but like I saw like the way he like, I mean, he'd come to school with a MacBook and legit ran like our school's systems and everything. And like, I think he was like a junior, and it's like, I wish I would have been that type of person that like would have jumped on like my passion for computers and jumped more into that systems and security at that time. Then, I mean, I didn't get into security if you look at it until I think I was like 23, 24. That's when I like started like straight security. All before that was just systems. So.
What about you, Alex?
I would actually say I wouldn't change pretty much anything. So I have a pretty specific way I've been approaching my career, and what I've been trying to do is what I call like dipping my toe into each type of industry. So that's like government sector, federal contracting, large cap companies, small cap company, and then a consulting firm, essentially. And then the last one would be like not-for-profit. So I've been looking at my career as trying to put myself into positions where I can experience that type of company, that type of industry. And so far, I've been through most of them. Then the not-for-profit, worked at MITRE. I did the large cap, worked at AWS. Government, was in the military. Federal contracting, worked with Kris. And now I'm doing the small cap, which was always one I assumed I would be doing later in my career. And it just, things kind of lined up where I was able to make it happen early. And the one that I haven't really dove into yet is consultancy. And frankly, I'm not particularly eager to get into consultancy. Nothing against it, but it's just not something I'm eager to go do yet.
Board member later.
Honestly, what's that?
Board member consulting later.
Yes. But
wait, my question though is which one was your favorite so far?
Definitely small cap for me. So working startup, because I've always been, and we've had this discussion, Bart, I've always been more of a generalist, and I tend to get bored of things exceptionally fast. So having the opportunity to dip my toe into thousands of different things is great for my ADD and keeping me focused on and not getting bored too quickly. Yeah, I honestly, I can say that definitively. I don't think I would have done anything differently. Well, as with all new people, we do have one last wraparound, don't we, dear Kris, for Bart?
Yeah. So, what security resource in the past year have you found really helpful?
So this one was hard for me because past year is my past year has been really weird just because, COVID and everything when I was at my other place and all of that. But I will say that the best security resource that I've ever found, was the Corleone blog, which is like really, I want to say, I think his name, Frank Atkins. It's funny. I always knew him as Captain Atkins, but this was where I was at. Another shout out, super smart guy, had told me about the website, and Corleone is, like if you're trying to learn like the intro to how does, binary exploitation work and stuff like that, like legitimately one of my favorite sites. I still to this day will go look up stuff like when I'm trying to do, they did a whole blog post. I mean, they're a few years old definitely now, but by far my favorite resource. So yeah.
Nice. Yeah. I don't think I've ever,
really
that stuff. Yeah.
Corleone? Oh yeah. No, Corleone, they got some great write-ups. I mean, they do everything from like SEH overflows and like just, a bunch of crazy stuff.
Huh. Cool. I'll have to check it out. So that's going to conclude the 0verture podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. If you like this, please give us a subscribe so you can catch us on our next 0verture podcast next month. And with that, Prelude out.